Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building, Governor John Hickenlooper. Welcome, sir.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, he's running for president in 2020. He was just telling us some great stories behind the scenes of people he knows, notable
industry,
people,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
like Big John Platt.
Yeah, Big John Platt went to East High School in Denver and went out to L.A. as a DJ, and he gives great lessons about young artists and how important it is they get with the right people. And he kind of, he made his way as a DJ for a while, but he's just such a cool guy.
Yep.
He's such a great storyteller. But I guess I think he's godfather of all three of Jay-Z's kids.
I don't know if he's godfather, but they got a relationship.
Yeah,
like they're very,
absolutely.
very
They're tight.
close.
There's no question about that. But anyway, so he comes back to Colorado and tries to make sure that he is a conduit for some young kids if they've got talent and they want to try and make it in L.A. He keeps his connection to the community tight.
What's y'all connection? How do you know?
I know him just because I know a lot of people in Denver and in the African American community. When I first ran for mayor in 2003, and I'd never run for politics or anything, and I got elected, and it was kind of this weird thing because I never ran for student council, and all of a sudden I'm mayor, and 2 weeks after I got elected, so 3 weeks before I got into office, a 15-year-old black kid named Paul Childs was gunned down in his front hall by an undertrained, overeager Denver police officer. And during my campaign, I'd stayed very close to, you ever hear of a guy named Wellington Webb?
No.
So Wellington Webb was the mayor for 12 years of Denver, and he was a 6'6" former basketball player, African-American mayor, and everybody else who was running attacked him all the time. And since I'd never run for anything, I didn't attack nobody. I stayed positive the whole time. And so when I won in this big upset, he sort of became my mentor. And so this shooting occurs 2 days after I get elected, and he introduces me. I go to the funeral. He introduces me to the family, but he introduces me to the black ministers, the pastors and the reverends. And this was the fifth shooting we had in that year, police shooting in that year. So I kind of, how Reverend Sharpton says if you're not at the table, you're on the menu?
Yes.
And so we expanded the table. So I had the ministers and the pastors, and this is Mayor Webb helped me do this, so that they became part of my team of negotiating major police reform. This is in 2003, 2004, so 10 years before Ferguson. But we created an Office of the Independent Monitor, so any allegation of police brutality could, outside the protection of the mayor's office, it could be independently investigated, subpoena powers, all that stuff. Create a civilian oversight commission so that the community could control how their neighborhoods were policed. So we did all this stuff, with me basically making all our there was the thing called the Ministerial Alliance. It's like 35 black pastors and ministers, and they became my partners. And so those relationships have stayed. I mean, these are all amazing people.
Gotcha.
Reverend Peters went to Montgomery in 1959 and was with Dr. King during the bus strike, all this stuff. So they've introduced me to the black community over these years, and that's how I got to meet John Platt through that. This guy, Robert Smith, who...
We've heard of him.
Yeah, heard of him.
Yeah. got a few $1 billion.
Yeah, he just gave Morehouse $44 million.
Yeah, and his
graduates.
And he does all this stuff nobody hears about, right? His parents were both public school teachers in Denver, and his father loved to go fly fishing. And in those days, back when his father was growing up, during segregation, there was only one trout stream in the whole Front Range where African Americans were allowed to go fish. And it was called Lincoln Hills. And it was kind of run down, been kind of developed, but never really succeeded as kind of a black, kind of a resort. Anyway, so when Robert Smith was a kid, he learned to fish up there. And then he comes down, and because he knew how to tie flies and fish, he went off to Cornell University from East High School in Denver. And East High School is, the big public high school. My son goes there. To this day, an amazingly good school, totally diverse, very high rates of success for everybody. Robert Smith goes off to Cornell University, and he knows how to tie flies, knows how to fish. And so he gets in with the cool kids, and ends up, being president of his fraternity at Cornell, and then he goes off to, I guess he goes to Goldman Sachs first.
He said the cool kids fish?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, cool kids fish.
That's what they do at Cornell? That's what cool is? I like fishing too. I'm from the country, so.
At least in that fraternity. He's into fishing. So he goes off and he goes with Goldman Sachs, figures out that a lot of these software companies don't have the in-between financing. They don't get a good valuation. So he puts together a private equity company, takes care of this. So all of a sudden, now he's a billionaire. So he's gone back and he bought Lincoln Hills, the whole valley.
Really? So what is he doing with it now?
So he has rebuilt it. It's a camp. He told me he's up to 70,000 kids, almost all of them kids of color, that go there and get a camping experience, an outdoor experience. So these are all kids from Metro Denver, go up into Lincoln Hills. He's also got a private fishing club that people pay to become a member of. And then he's put in, and these are incredible. You walk down and you see he puts in these flat concrete pads so that wounded warriors, when they come back from active duty and they've been damaged in some serious way, they can, in a wheelchair, fly fish on these concrete pads and he's totally. I bet he spent $5 or $10 million rebuilding the habitat of the stream, so it's like some of the best fishing in the Rocky Mountains. Anyway, the guy he finds more different ways. Robert Smith does of giving back. He produces 1 or 2 films a year.
Yeah, salute to my man Deion Taylor. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know Deion Taylor.
Oh wow.
Well, through Robert.
Yeah.
Deion, is he not one of the funniest men on earth?
Deion is hilarious.
I mean, he's
super hilarious.
He's outrageous. He says things you're not allowed to say, and he somehow, because he's so funny, he gets away with everything.
Yeah, and because he's not on a microphone. So it's like you only hear those things if you're sitting around him having a conversation.
Yeah,
That's interesting. Like Robert Smith is a billionaire. How do you help Robert Smith in that Denver area? How do you use your privilege as a white male to help him? Because I'm sure it's things that he can't even get done just because he's a billionaire.
So when he has, actually, I think Robert Smith can do anything. He's gone beyond. He's like Oprah in a funny way. He's gone to become and he's on his way to becoming a superstar in terms of opening doors. But I try to, like when he had a movie he produced called Traffic with Deion directed it.
Yeah.
A very, very impressive movie. So I did at the Governor's Mansion. I hosted a reception for it. So I got all the players from the entire community to come and go see the movie, and then have a reception afterwards to meet Deion, to meet Robert, and the stars all flew in from L.A.
You know what I like about this story? You told 2 stories about 2 black men, and not once did you use the term, some of my best friends are black. That's how you know it's a real story. You know what I'm saying? That's how you know it's a real relationship. You know what I mean?
Now, why jump into this game?
Well, let me talk about, I got to talk about Quincy.
Quincy who?
Quincy Jones.
You know Quincy too?
Well, I do know Quincy, but I'm not. I'm just giving you. I'm giving you smack now, just because Quincy's one of my. No, I'm just kidding.
Is he really?
No, certainly Quincy. Right now,
you got to give us a Quincy Jones story. Come on now.
Oh my God! Well, Quincy. Here's what I can tell you about Quincy. So he has a niece who has Down syndrome, and so he has been very sympathetic. And we have a family in Denver that has created the Global Down Syndrome Foundation, and they do a big gala. And Quincy comes all the time. And when I was mayor and then as governor, I'd go to try and lend support to this. And they have a runway. It's like a fashion show, and they have international celebrities come down the runway with these kids that have Down syndrome. And they're all dressed up, and it just celebrates that kids with Down syndrome are as cool as anybody.
Right.
And so anyway, Quincy comes out a bunch of times, so we kind of got to be friends, and we have a very good mutual friend. And so he will text me in the middle of or his friend will text me and send pictures that he doesn't go to bed. I mean, how old is Quincy Jones? 80, 85?
97.
Yeah, I mean,
they're about 80 years old.
About 80-something. And honest to God, I can show you. He texts photographs at like 4:30 in the morning.
What kind of photographs? That's booty call hours, bro. What kind of photographs he sending you, bro?
No, they're hanging out, and it's the end of the party. They've been up, and everyone else has gone to bed, and Quincy Jones still wants to party. He still wants to talk. He's still...
You sure he's not sending you dick pics or something?
Yeah,
right.
I'm absolutely sure. How dare you say that at Quincy Jones?
Maybe that's what he's expecting. I don't know. Now, why'd you jump into this game?
Presidential
game.
I looked around at the landscape, and I was... I think I'm the one person running. I never ran for student council. I didn't ever want the power associated. I got laid off as a geologist. My whole company got laid off. And I ended up opening a restaurant that brewed its own beer back in like the mid-'80s. So I was one of the very first craft brewing guys. And it took off. After 4 or 5 years, I worked just like you guys did. I'm sure your first few years you're doing something. You work 60 or 80 hours a week, and not much happens, and all of a sudden everything. If you're lucky and you work hard, good things happen.
Yeah, but not good things like being able to open a restaurant with our own beer. Jesus Christ. How'd that happen for you?
Yeah,
what was you doing?
I homebrewed when I dropped out of college after a year and lived up on the northern coast of Maine. And everybody homebrewed because it was
moonshine.
Yeah, it was just like that. It was because it's cheap.
See, now we say moonshine, you say homebrewed. It's moonshine.
Well, moonshine's more whiskey, isn't it? Moonshine's usually when you're distilling your own, hard liquor stuff.
But it was illegal though.
Yeah, both they're very common. We almost called our brew pub the Moonshine Brewing Company. For that same connection. We tried to put that together. Anyway, my business took off, and all of a sudden I was making a bunch of money, more than I ever thought. I just didn't want to go out of business. My mother wouldn't invest when I was trying to start my business. The rent was $1 per square foot per year. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was an abandoned part of Denver. And once I got into business, my mom wouldn't invest, but her sister did, my aunt. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want to lose her $10,000. I was just terrified I'd lose her money. And then all of a sudden, not only did I pay her back her money with 90% per year, I mean, the thing just took off. I ran for mayor of Denver in 2003 because I wanted to serve. I wanted to give back. Mm-hmm. I donate my salary every year to charity. Mm-hmm. And I looked at all the other people running for president, and they all were lifetime politicians. And it seemed like they were more interested in navigating, their next step on the ladder. And I looked at, in Colorado, we did major police reform 10 years before Ferguson, right? We created a scholarship foundation for the Denver public schools. So Denver public schools are 65%, 70% free and reduced lunch. If you work hard enough in Denver public schools, it doesn't matter how poor your family is, you can go to college in Colorado. We got an oil and gas guy to donate $50 million. There's a foundation to this thing. I mean, we're the first city in America to get universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. Mm-hmm. You want to try and make sure you lift everybody up. Right. Start making sure they start off they're at the starting line and they got an equal chance. Mm-hmm. So those kinds of stuff I was doing. I didn't see anybody else running who'd actually done what we'd already done in Colorado that we did, right? They're just talking about it. I did it.
I'm intrigued by something. You made a lot of money through illegal means. Let's be honest, mm-hmm. right? Cooking up the beer or whatever. Yeah. How does that impact you when it comes to prison reform and criminal justice reform? Because when it comes to these guys that are selling drugs, like a lot of them just want to create an opportunity for themselves the way you created an opportunity for yourself doing something illegal. Absolutely.
And I think, when we legalized marijuana, we were the first state to mm-hmm. legalize recreational marijuana. And to this day, it's very rare that you find black entrepreneurs that own these dispensaries. Right?
Very difficult to find.
Hard to find access to capital. Actually, Mayor Hancock, Michael Hancock was the mayor after I left. So, and he's black. So we had a black mayor, then Hickenlooper, and then Michael Hancock. He calls me the Oreo. He calls me the whatever. He's got some slang term for.
Oh, the vanilla icing in the middle of the Oreo.
But he's got some slang. Yeah. I can't think what his thing is. Anyway, he's actually putting together some economic development program to try and provide capital to African American entrepreneurs mm-hmm. who want to get into the legalized marijuana business.
I think that'd be great because I know a lot of times they require a lot of assets, and a lot of times we just don't have the assets to show.
Well, the worst part was we had the way the law first came down, and I just wasn't paying attention. You screw up. This is a mistake. That if you had convictions, if you had felonies, you couldn't get into the marijuana business. Well, if you step back and you look at most of those convictions for drugs were African Americans, Latinos, people of color. And so we had to address that, and basically we expunged anybody who had a conviction for marijuana, just wiped their record clean. So now that they're able to go forward and get the licenses. But it took us a couple of years to pull that together.
Have you ever smoked? Have you ever smoked marijuana?
Yeah, I was a kid.
This guy used to make beer. He used to cook beer. Of course he used to sell marijuana.
I said smoke.
I think that's dope, though, because it's just like right now it's some kid that's growing marijuana plants and probably been growing them for years and wants to start his own dispensary but don't have the opportunity. Like you actually got the opportunity to open up your own restaurant.
Yeah.
And sell your own beer right there.
Yeah.
Business must have been booming for you. that hooch you were selling.
Yeah, we did all right. Not in the beginning, but eventually. But, that's another, you talk about white privilege. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to put together a business like that, I had to raise whatever it was, like $575,000 to open that first restaurant, the brew pub.
How much?
$575,000.
Wow.
How did you raise that?
So I got $125,000 from an economic development loan from the city and $50,000 from a bank. But then I raised $400,000 from what they call friends and family. And I just went back to every person I'd ever known in my whole life and tried to get $5,000 and $10,000 from them. And that's why it took 2 years. My mom wouldn't invest. But in the end, I raised $400,000 from that extended network.
What about the moonshine money?
The moonshine money wasn't there yet.
Oh, got you.
This is when I was starting that very first business, trying to get that together.
That's definitely white privilege, because back in the day, there was nobody I could go to and try to raise
exactly.
$500,000.
No way.
Lord have mercy.
No, that's my point. And there is anybody that is trying to start a business, if you've got a network that you can go to and say, hey, can you give me $10,000? Can you give me $15,000 and get to $400,000? That's pretty privileged.
Can I ask you a question? How come Democrats can't talk this straight and honest on the debate stage? Like right now, we're having a conversation that sounds so organic, but on the stage, everybody's so robotic with these canned answers and rehearsing lines. Like, why can't they just kick it like this on the debate stage?
That's a good question. Part of it's 60 seconds, and only a few people get the 60-second questions. A lot of times they ask the 60-second question of the big name candidate.
I knew that.
And then everybody else gets 30-second questions.
I knew that. I knew I wasn't tripping, because I saw that the other night. I'm like, yo, they cutting off certain people faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're what they call responding, then you only get 30 seconds. So
Wow.
it's tough. It's the different places of bias, and that's that's not a racial bias, but that's a bias nonetheless. You see it all through politics. When I first got elected mayor, and again I was lucky. This guy Wellington Webb kind of took me under his wing, and he was a big guy. I mean, he was, just his arms would go all the way around, and that was right when LeBron James had come up. So this is 2000, the fall of 2003, and Carmelo Anthony had been drafted by the Nuggets.
Yes.
And so Wellington was smart enough to he was stepping down as mayor. He got 2 seats on the court at the Pepsi Center, and so I called him up and said, "Hey, Wellington, on December 7th, when Cleveland comes to town, and we're going to see LeBron play against Carmelo, who are you taking? Could I be your guest?" And he said, well, he's a classic politician. He says, well, I'll have to spend I'll get back to you in a couple days. He makes me wait 10 days, but then I get to go. And so as mayor, I balanced the worst budget deficit. We finally got United Airlines to sign a deal with the airport, good things. But by the time we get to that game, the Nuggets were 12-5, and they'd been a doormat for the previous decade. So we're out there, and we're in just beginning the second half, and I've had a beer, and Mayor Webb's had a beer. Mayor Webb's much bigger, so he was not affected, whereas maybe I was a little loose-lipped. And I said, Mayor Webb, how's it feel to have a new mayor, uppity mayor like me come along and have me be the guy that's, I got the lease signed with United, I got balanced the budget, the worst deficit ever, and the Nuggets are 12-5.
Jesus Christ, are you a dickhead or something?
And he laughs.
What did you say?
He laughs. Well, we had a pretty good relationship. He looks at me, he laughs, and he puts his arm around me. His arm goes around my shoulder, comes all the way back to the center of my chest, and he pulls me into him, and he goes, John, why don't you give me a call when you've won 2 Super Bowls and 2 Stanley Cups?
Wow.
And he just put me right down. he put me right, and I knew he'd do that in some way or another. I mean, Mayor Webb was one of the, I argue, one of the great mayors of the second half of the 20th century. And so when I first got elected, and I had to put a cabinet together and senior staff, he challenged me and helped me. He said, "How are you going to have diversity here?" And I said, "Well, I'm gonna go above and beyond." And we had 420 people volunteered to be part of my transition, and we ended up with 50% people of color in my cabinet and senior staff, 60% women, and in every case, we went sometimes above and beyond to make sure we found the right person, because we weren't going to sacrifice talent. And this is a weird thing. So here, I'd never been in politics. I put this really diverse group of people together from all over the country. The guy who helped me do the police reform, a guy named Al LeCabe, grew up in one of the tough parishes in New Orleans. He had helped desegregate Loyola. Then he went in and joined the Marines for a couple of years, and he came back, went to law school. He ended up being in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I convinced him to come and be the head of the Department of Public Safety. I mean, he knew the world, right? He'd been up and down both sides of the street, and he came in and worked with these pastors and reverends to do our police reform because he lived that life. And we had our cabinet, when we did Parks and Rec, the transition group gave me 3 white candidates, 3 white males, as pick from one of these 3. That's what they did. I said, wait a second, 94% of the kids who use our rec centers are kids of color. These 3 people aren't going to know what their lives are like, and we have dropout rates. 7th grade, 8th grade. We got to deal with that. And so they went away. The transition people came back, and this time they came back with 2 white males and 1 white woman. I said, that's not where we need to be, and they sent them off again. And by this time now, it's been 3 months, and the newspapers are saying, well, I've lost my touch. I can't hire talent anymore. And they come back with a woman named Kim Bailey, who was the number 3 person at Chicago's Department of Parks and Rec. She was finishing her PhD on what they call early adolescence disassociating, right? So it's how kids, when they're like 12 or 13 or 14 years old, they stop hanging out with their family. They stop. They want to get out of school, and they join gangs. And so that was what she was studying. She was African American, and she was twice as good as anybody else we interviewed. But we just had to take a little longer to keep searching, right? That's really how that world succeeds. How you get a really diverse group of people. You just have to hold your standards and keep pushing people to find. So anyway, she came in, and within 2 years, she convinced the world. First, she convinced me, and then she convinced the world that we turned all of our rec centers free.
Wow! So
that every one of them, instead of having to spend $1 or $25 every year, or whatever,
that helps the poor and disenfranchised. They got a place to go now.
Exactly. Well, and you look at health outcomes. A big part of the challenges that Latinos and Black communities face is they're not active enough. They don't have opportunities to stay physically fit and stay in shape in the same way that the suburban kids do in more cases. So you see more hypertension, leads to heart attacks. You see more diabetes, things like that. It's just activity.
Well, exercise is a luxury for
exactly.
for people who are just trying to eat. You know what I'm saying? Like if I'm trying to eat, like exercise, I can't go exercise. I got to go figure out go work so I can make some money, put some food on the table.
Exactly my point.
For y'all, it's easy.
Now, what about, we also talk about real estate for low-income families and for especially the Black community. It's hard for us to get loans so much. How do we ease that a little bit to make the playing field fair for everybody?
Well, I think it's not just loans; it's the down payment. Also, times loans now are the low interest rate.
3.6, something like that.
Oh, it's even. I think it's down, dropped
3.5.
again last week.
Really?
Yeah, it's down close to 3.5. These are, historically, it's always been 6.5%, 7%. But we found in Denver, it was more of a function of trying to make sure that the down payment, instead of having a 5% down payment, they get a temporary, people that are coming from low-income backgrounds, and we were actually, this is whites, blacks, Latinos, whoever, that we would help them get the down payment to get them in the door, and then they could pay back that down payment. And that meant they had to get a different kind of a loan, because a lot of the loans don't allow you to get help with your down payment.
Right.
I'm sure you know all this stuff. That's basically the way you end up with these kind of red line neighborhoods. Anyway, we did a bunch of that stuff.
Dope. I saw you say that you're not a great debater, right?
Yeah.
And if they're only giving you 30 seconds, I can see why.
That makes it difficult.
You're long-winded, but it's cool. It's good. It's good. It's good to be long-winded.
I'm good for radio.
You're good for radio. So if you're not a great debater, what's the point of being on that stage?
Well, because you got to go up there and try and get your message out, right? If you're the one person who's done the stuff that everybody else is just talking about, you got to have a chance to show it, right? And to talk about police reform and why it matters. We do. One of the ways I got to know John Platt was he reached out to me and just said, these are some kids I knew when I went to East High School, and they're doing life in prison without parole. And I know a couple of these kids that are, the Lee brothers. They wouldn't have ever harmed someone. They might have gotten in a fight here or there, but they would never have killed someone or used a gun on somebody. And so I commuted some of those sentences. That became part of the, or was part of the, how do you look at overall prison reform, right? So if you're talking about commuting sentences of people like the Lee brothers, there was a kid named Eric Leitner, same kind of a situation. But also, what about all those other guys that come out of prison and when I first became governor, we had over 1,000 people in our state prison that were in solitary confinement. A lot of them had some kind of mental health issue. We were just making a bad situation worse. So we transformed that. I think now they're down to 5 people or 10 people that are just super hard cases. But we also dramatically changed training. So when someone's about to, the year before they get released, how do we make sure that they're going to have a real shot at getting a job? So not only job training, but introductions, right, to businesses that are looking to hire people.
We call these places correctional facilities, but what are you really trying to correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
After 2 days of debates, I'm not going to front, I was disgusted by the Democrats, right? Because I feel like they're not discussing the severity of the situation that this country is in right now. Like, I think everything that Donald Trump is doing is part of a larger fascist agenda, right? Yep. And I look at all these conversations about the Russians interfering with elections, and then you see Mitch McConnell blocking election security bill, and I'm sitting there like, how can we ensure that it's a fair election in 2020? And how come nobody is making a big deal about any of these things? Don't get me wrong, climate change, healthcare, all of that is good, but I'm talking about the immediate threat of Trump and his administration right now. Why are the Democrats not raising hell about this?
Well, they should be. And I tried to get this into the debate, and I couldn't lay it up. But we took this on in Colorado over the last, 12 years, 14 years. Colorado now, we have same-day registration. So you can walk up to the ballot place on election day and register to vote and vote right there. And everything's backed up. We have automatic registration. So you sign up for your driver's license, you're registered to vote, right? You're going to get Medicaid, you're registered to vote. And it's automatic you automatically have the right to vote, and it can't be taken away. We also did mail ballots, which are 30% cheaper, and you get 50% greater turnout, right? So we've done all this stuff in Colorado. Why isn't the whole country doing this?
Why?
It saves money, and you get more people to vote.
And why is Mitch McConnell blocking an election security bill if they're not in cahoots with the Russians?
Well, I totally. I mean, that's that. He
Do you
has
think
no
they're in
answer.
cahoots with the Russians?
Well, I don't know if it's cahoots, but without question, the Russians were involved and clearly seemed eager to help Donald Trump become president.
To how much impact you think? How much?
It's hard to measure because we don't know exactly all that they've done. And, there's a legitimate question about whether the federal government's still doing the research. Why isn't Congress? We know we had foreign powers manipulating some of our election processes and disseminating fake news, targeting voters and telling them absolute lies.
But how do we fix that? Can that ever be fixed to stop?
And isn't it a red flag when Mitch McConnell's blocking the election security bills? Like,
it's hard to imagine that he can get away with that, right? It does seem like he is waving a red flag right in front of people's faces just to enrage them, to show them that we're gonna go into places like Georgia and Mississippi, and we're gonna just change the way people who can vote and who can't, and it's going to help Republicans.
And how do you fix it? Like if you said.
Well, I think you need a national policy on how to protect people's right to vote, and that should be an essential basis of a more expanded policy that does things like same-day registration. The nice thing in Colorado, the other thing is people are so worried about cybersecurity, which they should be. Cybersecurity that war is going on right now. We're being attacked every day by. It's not just Russia. It's China. It's North Korea. It's Iran. All these places have their own agendas of what they're using cybersecurity to attack us for, and a lot of that's connected to our elections. Right in Colorado, we have a backup paper ballot for every single voter. So you can vote. You mail in your ballot. You can go to the election box, vote on an electronic machine, but you also get a backup paper ballot from that time you vote with that machine. That's the kind of stuff that has to make people feel secure, so that they vote, right? Part of this is, I think what the Republicans are doing, and I don't think they're being very subtle about it, is trying to make people think their vote doesn't matter, and then people won't vote. And if you look in the midterms, the midterms is where, we had Democrats rising up in huge numbers. And I think when these primaries, we're going to see huge numbers as well, right?
Yeah, but will it matter if there's Russian interference? Or will it matter if, let's say, which it's going to probably end up being a close election, and then the DOJ, who's on Trump's side, challenges, the Democratic win. Then it goes to the Supreme Court, who's also in Trump's pocket, and they say, you know what, there was some type of interference or something, like Trump's going to stay in. Like, how do you win if the fight is fixed?
Yeah, well, that's the challenge, and I think.
But why aren't the Democrats acting like this isn't like an extreme case? Like, it's just everybody's so nonchalant about it. Like, I don't understand.
No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Do you think that anything that Trump did in office is good at all? Do you agree with anything that Trump's done and say, well, that is a good thing? Again, to be in a Democratic primary, you better have nothing. I think some of the stuff like China was cheating on international agreements. They were stealing intellectual property. You can't let that go on. He's got to challenge that, and he did. Now, a tariff war is the worst thing you could do, right? Tariff wars are for losers. Everybody loses, especially low-income people. They're the ones who pay the disproportionate tax. I mean, basically, it's a tax on everybody, right? They tell me $850 per family of America. That's what we're all paying when we buy stuff in an average year because of his tariff war. Tariff wars are for losers. That what we should have done is isolate China and, use our alliances with NATO and other countries in Asia. And everybody wants China to conform to, the basic standards of fair play. Mm-hmm. We could have done that. And that's what TPP, that's what Obama was trying to get done. Well, I'll come back to that in a second. Anyway, I think that Trump's notion of dealing with China, we had to deal with China. Mm-hmm. He just did it in the wrong way. So that's one thing where I support his end goal. I just wouldn't have done that.
I heard that deal's already done, like the tariff deal. I heard he got it done already, and he's going to roll it out like 6 weeks before the election next year.
Well, we'll see if that, again, the damage that he's doing every day, if he waits till 6 weeks before the election, he's going to look awful because the bottom line is that, I'm out in Iowa, and if you're a soybean farmer in Iowa, you need 10 consecutive good years just to get back to where you were 2 years ago.
Wow.
Right? And where are the small manufacturing jobs that he promised? They're nowhere, right? Those people, when this election heats up a year from now, you'll hear one Democrat after another as they go into the final caucuses and the primaries. So 10 months from now, you're going to hear them say, are you better off now than you were, 3 years ago? And most people, many, many people that voted for Trump are going to say, no, I'm not. I'm worse off. And he's going to, by that, if he waits until 6 weeks before the election to announce, I've got a tariff war success, I'm a victor, it's going to be too late. And I think that I've talked to every economist. You run for president, people take your call. Mm-hmm. There is not one example in history of a tariff war where either side came out better. It's for losers. Everybody loses. There's no example of anyone achieving their diplomatic goal through a tariff war. It's a dinosaur of a technique, right? The way you win in these games is to get your international alliance and get everybody together and all negotiate how you're going to tighten the restraints on whoever it is, China, Iran, North Korea. You're going to tighten the constraints on their economy. And again, you got to make sure that it's humanitarian. They've got to have enough medical supplies and enough food and all that stuff. But they're going to have a pretty bleak future unless they conform to international standards that we all agree to. I mean, it's a form of kind of international democracy, right?
So Donald Trump is a loser and China's a loser.
Absolutely. There is no historical example of someone coming out a winner in a tariff war. I don't see how he gets his way out of this, to be honest.
I want to ask you, I don't know how he's getting away with all the shit he's doing, period, but let me ask you a couple questions about Trump. Do you think he's an illegitimate president?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's hard to measure that, and I think by bringing that battle up again and again, and he defends himself and we attack him. I mean, he's playing us, right? Don't you think to a certain extent even the racist stuff, we got to call him on it. Every time he says it, we'll say, that is racist. That is totally unacceptable.
No.
What does that do?
No. You know what y'all should be calling him? A fascist. It's a fascist agenda. Like, why is nobody using that language?
Well, that's the next step. My point is, calling him names, though, it just allows him to beat his chest, and he rouses up his base, and everybody gets fired up. I say we call him as a racist or a fascist, but then we get back and say, here's where you failed.
You did not deliver small manufacturing jobs
Right.
to people. You did not help rural America and their economy. You did not, you've lurched from one international crisis to another. You're on the edge of creating another war pretty much every week.
He's a criminal.
You're a criminal, obviously breaking the law. You will not
Yes.
reveal his taxes. He won't show people what his dealings are with Russia.
He's a traitor. If the Russian interference, which we know is true, that's why people talk like it's not true. It's true. It's there.
Right.
Mueller said it. The Senate Intel Committee said it. Why aren't the Democrats yelling that at the top of their lungs?
Right. That's the thing. Even the Trump campaign admits they had these meetings with Russian agents and they exchanged information, polling data, and all this stuff. I don't know if I guess that's not illegal, but even if it's not illegal, it's something that no American should stand for.
How do you reverse all the ish that he's done?
Well, I think that.
And how long does that take?
Well, that's my first 4 years as governor, I went through the worst droughts, worst wildfires, worst flood, that shooting in Aurora movie theater. I mean,
Oh man.
I went to 34 funerals in my first 4 years. It was just, all these kids didn't come back from Iraq and Afghanistan. I go mourn with their families. And in the big natural disasters, I learned something that when people have lost a lot, right, so much, you can't tell them you're just going to rebuild.
Right.
Well, we're going to come back and rebuild. They've lost too much. You've got to. They won't be able to motivate themselves to look forward. And if people aren't looking forward, the chances of them succeeding diminish, right? They go down. And we found that you've got to tell people we're going to rebuild better than it was before. And I think the same thing. Trump is like a natural disaster. It's like a hurricane or a flood to the moral fabric of this country, to all the things that we value. And we got to tell people we're going to go back and rebuild better than we were before Trump. And we're going to have a more agile and larger diplomatic corps. We're going to have an urban agenda that's going to be bolder and more comprehensive. I hope again, the reason I'm running for president is all the stuff we did with universal pre-K for the urban kids, scholarship programs. We've got an apprenticeship program that we're making sure is available to all the urban population of Denver and the whole metropolitan area, now ultimately the entire state of Colorado. But it's apprenticeships that you start, when you're 16 years old. I mean, how many of our kids, think about it, 65% of our kids never get a 4-year college degree. That's been true for 30 years. And we go around telling them that they're failures, right? 20% of our kids drop out before they graduate. Another 20% graduate from high school but never do another class of any kind. We know that that's no recipe for success for most kids. Why aren't we focusing on all those kids that need skills to be able to keep up with all these new industries? So we do an apprenticeship program in Denver or in Colorado now. It's not just in Denver, but it's in Colorado, where kids, when they're 16, they go to work 2 days a week, and it's at a bank. It's not just trades; it's a bank or insurance company, advanced manufacturing, hospital. They work 2 days a week, and then they go back to school 3 days a week, and they study stuff that's going to make them better where they work. They're just 16, 17 years old. Then the next year, they work 3 days instead of 2 days, and the third year they work 4 or 5 days. The end of the 3 years, they've made $30,000. Most of them are living at home, so they've saved some money. They've been going back and studying at community colleges, so not only do they have their high school degree, but they have a year's college credit if they want to go that direction. That kind of stuff, giving kids from all different backgrounds, right? Making sure that urban kids have an experience of what a job's like.
Say black and brown. It's okay.
No. Black, brown.
Yeah, I hate the word urban. It's like, say black and brown.
You don't like the word urban?
Mm-mm.
I got to learn
I feel like that's the politically correct way to say black.
Well,
Urban.
the black and brown kids
There you go.
are able to get the skills and the experience that allow them to compete at a more successful level when they're out. Instead of just finishing their high school, if they do the apprenticeship program, they've made $30,000. They've got their high school degree. They have a year of college if they want it. I mean, it gives them it gives them a launching pad, right?
It sounds to me like you have a specific black agenda, like specific things you would like to do for the black community. Do
You mean that thing I used to call my urban agenda?
Yeah. There you go. Call it the black agenda.
All right, Charlamagne.
Yeah.
No, I do. I look at, if you go back and any white person has to be very cautious when they talk about slavery, right? Mm-hmm. And yet,
Not really. Not if you just say it's wrong. It was wrong.
well, exactly. That's what I say.
And the people that went through it need to be compensated.
And I say that the slavery is the persistent nagging shame of America, right? That even today, denies opportunity, the promise of this country to, a large proportion of our citizens. And so you start getting into those kinds of recognitions that slavery didn't end at the end of the Civil War. You know this. You go to Jim Crow. You go to unpaid convict labor. You go to
redlining.
Yes,
there was so many systemic things.
Legalized
done to
terrorism.
Black
There's all the lynchings. Have you been down to Montgomery? Have you seen that
No, I haven't.
Peace and Justice Memorial?
No, I've heard about it, though.
So I had a bunch of these black ministers came down with me to Montgomery a couple months ago and walked through that. It is breathtaking. Whether you're black or brown or white, it is hard to walk through that memorial without crying and without feeling the reality of what this was like, generation after generation after generation. And I think, I look first. If you're ever going to own it, somehow there's got to be an apology.
Yes,
right. And
which
the apology
America has yet to do.
Yeah, well, it should come from the White House. One of the things I did, and you get lambasted by some people, you get praised by others. But we went out. There was a thing called the Sand Creek Massacre that happened in Colorado in 1865, I guess. It's 1864. It's 1865. Anyway, 200 mostly old men and women were killed, Cheyenne and Sioux. And we reached out to the descendants of those victims, and we negotiated for about a year and a half, and then we had a process and a formal apology at the state capitol, where the state of Colorado apologized for their role in this. But we built all these relationships and talked through some of the issues, like, if you're a Native American kid and the local high school team is called the Savages, right, or the Paonia Redskins or whatever, how offensive that is. And we ended up. I had a director of the Indian Affairs named Ernest House, and Ernest got some of the young athletes from the Native American community to go into some of these high schools and talk to the kids, not negotiate with the board or the parents or the teachers, the principal, but with the kids, and say, here's how it makes me feel that your baseball team is still called the Indians, and here's the history of what that's meant over time. And so we took out. There were 34. I think I got this number right. 34 different teams, high school teams in Colorado that still had some of these old slanderous names. And we've changed all but 2 of them now by getting the kids to go to their coaches and the kids to go to their parents and say, no, I don't want to play on this team anymore. And that's just a different way of doing change. Right?
Got you.
But we would have never gotten to that if we hadn't done the apology and built the relationships with the Native American community.
How do you feel about reparations for African descendants of slaves? Because, apologies are nice, but...
Well, I think I'm all for the bill to study it. I look at it, I think it's going to be hard.
What is there to study, though? You can watch Roots. You can watch you can watch Birth of a Nation. Like, what is there to study? You go to that museum you talked about in Montgomery. Like, what is there to study?
Well, I think there's all kinds of issues of how do you define what reparations are used for what?
Y'all know. Well, y'all know what reparations are.
I know what reparations are.
So,
a lot of people don't realize that I haven't seen the level of reparations that the Germany pays for the Holocaust. They're still paying reparations today. They're up over $80 billion that they paid to the families of victims and to the surviving victims from the Holocaust.
And you don't think America should do the same?
What?
It shouldn't be the same here.
Well, my point is what Germany did before they made any final decisions, they went through and had a whole process by which they studied in some detail of what these reparations would be used for. You got to build public sentiment, right? Now, your argument...
Public sentiment for who? Black people, we all down. We don't care what everybody else thinks.
Well, it's a big country, right? And you want to make sure that
it ain't about everybody else, though. It's about something systemic happened to a group of people to put them in a bad position, so something systemic needed to happen to get them out.
Okay, and how do you look at the issues around Native Americans?
They should get taken care of too, but they have gotten taken care of in this country a little bit. But they should still be getting taken care of.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, by a little, you're talking about the reservations?
Yeah.
Have you been? How many reservations?
I know they're terrible now, but
But they were always terrible. They got the worst land that there was to be given, and they got land. They were put on land and told to stay on that land. The land couldn't possibly support the way they fed themselves. All right, their economy could never survive on a barren, 2,000-acre piece of land in Oklahoma. That's what caused the Saginaw Creek Massacre. Was these young braves? They were starving, and they went out and they would rustle cattle, or they'd kill a horse on some neighboring farm.
So they're still old as well. but at least they were offered something. Black people have never been offered anything.
Right. Well, they were offered something, then it was taken away.
It was taken away, the 40 acres of the mule, absolutely.
Right. So, anyway.
That's probably because they gave all the shitty land to the Indians already, so they didn't have no more shitty land to give us.
Yeah, that's probably part of it. There's always a lot of debate on what's it going to look like, how large is it going to be, what's the appropriate level to how do you measure people that have been here for 1 generation or 2 generations or 3 generations or 4 generations? I think you got to study that before you start trying to go and negotiate a direction of federal finance.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a number or if it's, like you said, land, or I don't know, tax breaks. I don't know what it is. I just think that something has to be done. That's part of the apology, because the best apology is change behavior. So America can say sorry all day long, but the behavior hasn't changed. There's still things being done to oppress and marginalize black and brown people in this country every day.
I'm not arguing.
Well, we appreciate you for joining us.
Oh, you bet.
That's right. And good luck with everything.
And are you dropping out of the race? Because you haven't gotten over 2% in the polls.
Well, 2% makes me 7th. Right, so if you go back and look at Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton, where they were in July of 1975 or July of 1991, they were 1.5 or 2%. Right, so it's
you still got hope.
Well, I got hope. I'm not saying it's any fun to be at 2%, especially with so many candidates running. It makes that hill a lot steeper, but it's just what it is. My mom was widowed twice before she was 40, so she raised 4 kids by herself. I was the youngest of the kids, and she would tell us you can't control what life throws at you, and sometimes you're gonna run into obstacles that are just tougher than you could have ever expected. So you can't control what it comes down the road, but you can control how you respond. And I'm at 2%. It's what it is. I'm not what I would have chosen.
Are you eligible for the next debate?
No, I got to get to 130,000 small donors. That's the hard.
Gotcha.
Got to get people to go to Hickenlooper.com and give me $1.
Well, tell them now. Tell them right now.
Yeah.
Go to Hickenlooper.com. Give me $1. That's how I get on the debate stage. It sounds pretty easy.
Call
to
Robert
me.
Smith. Oh, you need 130,000 different donors.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
A lot of different donors.
Well, we appreciate you for joining us.
Yeah, you said
John
a lot of good things, man. Appreciate it.
Hickenlooper, thank you so much and good luck.
Yeah, thank you, DJ, and thank you, Charlamagne. Appreciate it.
It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.